This is every difference between the Switch 2 and the Switch 1. Starting first with the hardware on the console. Now on the Switch 2, there's a built-in microphone that can be used to remove background noise in the upper edge of the console. So because Game Chat is a huge feature for the new Switch 2, this works in combination with a high-performance audio processing chip that is shown to work so well that it can actually take out the noise of a vacuum cleaner even if it's right next to you. Let's just hope it also removes the noise of me scolding my friend for putting a vacuum right next to my face. One of the big problems of the Switch 1 was that you could only charge it with the USB-C connector on the bottom of the console. But now on the Switch 2, there's still that connector on the bottom, there's also an additional one on the upper edge of the console, making it a lot easier to charge when you're playing in handheld mode. While the Switch 2 doesn't have OLED features, it does have another way to get even better color definition in the games, this being due to the high dynamic range, or HDR, which means that the range between our light and dark colors is going to be even greater. And as such, the Switch 2 screen actually looks even more clear compared to the OLED Switch, as you can see in comparisons like this. One of the similarities between the Switch 2 and the Switch 1, and thankfully so, is that we have full backwards compatibility between all of our Switch 1 games on the console, including digital and physical games. Both consoles feature a kickstand to let you play them in tabletop mode, but the Switch 2 stand now runs the entire width of the back of the console. And because it's connected to two hinges for greater stability, it's a lot more certain to stay on your tabletop than the regular Switch 1. And it also has a larger range of motion, so you can play it at different angles as needed. On the Switch 1, there was only one air intake port on the top of the console, but now the Switch 2 has two new ones on the bottom left and right edge. And apparently, according to girlfriend reviews, it also smells pretty good too. People were doing weirder with their Steam Decks. Instead of using a physical rail to slide up and down our Joy-Cons onto the Switch 2, it now connects using magnets. But don't worry about stability, because apparently, according to early tests, you could literally be holding it by this Joy-Con from the top, and it's still not going to drop. And instead, the way to get it disconnected is that we have these physical trigger buttons, as opposed to just the little circle that we saw in the original Switch 1 Joy-Cons. Even at the time when the Switch 1 launched, it did not have a lot of internal storage. So it's fitting that when the Switch 2 launched, it has more, but still not a lot by regular standards. Only 256 gigabytes, but that's a big increase from the Switch 1's only 32 gigabyte storage, which even less of that is usable after system files. And luckily with the new storage, we'll also find that reading and writing data should be even faster, meaning that quicker load times should be experienced during gameplay. Not only is the Switch 2 supposed to have improved speakers, I mean, it'd be sad if they had worse, it does also support having 3D audio for certain titles. So if you wanted to watch one of those 8D videos where they make it feel like there's a speaker going around your head, knock yourself out. While the battery capacity of the Switch 2 is 1.2 times larger than that of the Switch, increasing to 5,220 from the original 4,310, because of the increased power draw to the console, it's actually supposed to be less battery life overall, giving us only 2 to 6 hours of battery life, a big step down from the original Switch's 4.5 to 9 hours. As you can see from the side-by-side comparison, the Switch 2 screen is a huge difference compared to the Switch 1, now measuring at 7.9 inches as compared to the 6.2. And with that, we also have a new resolution as well, increasing all the way up to 1080p as opposed to the regular Switch's 720p. And while the frame rate can go up to 120 FPS available in supported titles, it is going to be fixed to a max of 60 FPS for 4K output, which also means that you can now expect to see in a lot more Switch 2 games the options for performance or fidelity. I mean, it wouldn't be a new console generation if you had to choose which one's which, right? Can't have both. How much does the Switch 2 weigh compared to the Switch 1? Well, if you want to get a good comparison, pull out your Switch 1 console and then hold 3 Joy-Cons, since that'll give you roughly the same estimate of what the Switch 2 feels like, weighing in at 1.1 pounds, as compared to the original Switch's weight at just 0.88 pounds. The Switch 2 dock is going to weigh in at 0.84 pounds, while the Switch 1's dock only weighed in at 0.72. The Switch 1 Joy-Cons used to weigh in at 1.7 ounces for the left one and 1.8 ounces for the right. And while the Switch 2 Joy-Cons are heavier, at 2.3 ounces for the left and 2.4 ounces for the right, it is interesting that they always seem to maintain a 0.1 ounce disparity. And one of the reasons the Joy-Cons are now heavier for the Switch 2 is because of the new functionality, since now we could use the Switch 2 Joy-Con as mice. And if you're worried about scratching these on different surfaces while you're sliding them across, don't worry, I was too. But the answer is apparently that if you attach the Joy-Con wrist strap attachment, then that offers mouse feet on either end, which now gives us an option to use touchscreen functionality while playing on the TV, which I cannot wait to see how it's used in Mario Maker. To give us access to the new Game Chat feature that's now included with Nintendo Switch Online, you'll now find on the Joy-Cons a C button that's placed below the home button, the C standing for chat. Since everything seems to be larger on the Switch 2, it makes sense that the analog sticks are also larger on both the left and right sticks. And that's not the only shape that's changed on our Joy-Cons, since now the SR and SL buttons that you see when you detach the Joy Joy-Con from the console to use it in something like tabletop mode, those buttons are now wider and longer, which should hopefully make them easier to press when you're playing something like Mario Party. And also, the left and right bumper buttons on the Joy-Con have been lengthened. Here's a change that makes the new Joy-Cons a little bit easier to play with sideways, since now the controller indicator lights are actually placed differently. In the past, they used to be placed right on the inside, so you'd have to tilt the controller towards you to actually see which number your controller was. But now the indicator lights are placed differently on the inner colored section where the rail used to be, so you can see which player number that you are without having to tilt it towards you. HD Rumble is one of those features that you felt like you heard a lot when the Switch 1 first came out, but then not a lot was told about it during the console's lifetime. I mean, there's only so many 1-2 Switch games that you could put out. But now the Switch 2 seems to be revamping it with the HD Rumble 2. While on the original Switch, we would see that the rumble was created by a motor spinning a weight on the inside, the difference now is that the HD Rumble 2 is created by vibrating side to side with the help of magnets on the inside of the console, which really goes to show you that the Switch 2 has a running magnet theme. The gyroscope and the accelerometers from the Switch 1 Joy-Cons do return in the Switch 2, and now they obviously have the mouse sensors, but interestingly so, the right Joy-Con's IR motion camera doesn't return in the Joy-Con. Considering how few games this was actually used in, I guess that makes sense. And with the left and right control sticks being larger, they are thankfully more quiet, which would be great and all, as long as they don't drift. The GameCube controller is one of Nintendo's most coveted controllers that they've ever made. I mean, go to a Smash tournament and you'll see as much. So that's why they took design inspiration for it in the Switch 2, with now the grip handles being designed with a reference to it, with the base of the grip made thinner to give the fingers more space. And additionally, there's no longer a seam between the grips and the rest of the controller body, making the whole thing feel a lot more sturdy. The Switch 2 controller also has a new audio jack feature, which is going to make sense for a headset mic for the new game chat, or just for general headphone usage if you just want to listen to your games. One of the features you'll only find in the Switch 2 Pro controller but not in the regular Joy-Cons, even the Joy-Con 2s, is that on the back of the grips there's extra buttons, GL and GR. And what are these supposed to be meant for? Well, apparently anything, considering that you can program the button input to any input that you want in game, and the assigned inputs will be saved for each game, as well as each different player. While the Switch 1 needed a separately sold dongle to get the Ethernet, the Switch 2 dock thankfully has an integrated Ethernet port built in, and as long as people online remember to use it, we might actually have something that's playable. The big thing that we're going to hear about with the Switch 2 is upscaling, because even if the software doesn't support 4K resolution natively, it's actually possible for it to upscale in the dock and then output to 4K if the television supports it, making even games that aren't meant for the Switch 2 look better on the Switch 2. Some users on the Switch 1 reported that the console would overheat while playing docked, but thanks to the new built-in fan inside of the Switch 2's dock, hopefully that should avoid it. While the Switch 2's dock is missing a USB port in the back when compared to the Switch 1 dock, that is made up for in the fact that we have the new port on top of the console that's still usable when docked, giving us that port at the top and the 2 USB ports on the side. As far as the console software itself, there are now 258 user profile icons to choose from, which is a lot considering the original Switch 1 felt like it had a lot, and that was only 147. When you look at the Switch 2 home screen apps, you notice that these have rounded corners when compared to the squared off edges of the original Switch. There's no nice way to say this, the Switch 1 eShop ran terribly, and thankfully the Switch 2 doesn't seem to be launching that same way, since now it loads much faster as you can see from this example. And hopefully it stays that way and doesn't get overrun with the same kind of AI bloatware that plagued the Switch 1. A big feature only available on the Switch 2 is the game chat, which kind of looks like a Zoom call, and it lets you talk to 12 different participants for video chat, and up to 4 people at a time could share their game screen for all the other people in the call to see. And to make sure that people are using it, Nintendo's also letting us use it for free without a membership up until March 31st of 2026. And we're not just able to share our game screens, but also share the games themselves, since the Switch 2 allows for Game Share, a new feature where you can share selected parts of supported games with up to 3 people, which if that sounds familiar, then you're probably in a Nintendo DS with a download play feature, which while it was considered for the Switch 1, it was ultimately scrapped. But thankfully, we got it here, but it can be shared to both Switch 2 and Switch 1. So even if you decide to purchase the Switch 2, your old Nintendo Switch could still come in handy. Now through the help of Game Chat, we can also use the Game Share this way, which is that if one person has the game, up to 4 people can play it together using voice chat, though that's going to be exclusive only to the Switch 2. So if you're really looking forward to playing Big Brain Academy Brain versus Brain with your friends, make sure they're all spending $450. Brand new to the Switch 2, and thankfully so, there's a dedicated accessibility section in the options, which they were able to change a lot of things that we weren't able to on the past game, such as text size, enabling bold text, hide contrast mode, the zoom feature, which was from the Switch 1, but we can also invert the menus to essentially get dark mode, or even grayscale the whole console to be easier on your eyes. There's also the ability to fully remap buttons, or something that I'm thankful for, the ability to change orientation. So if a game expects you to hold something sideways, then you can make it so that the control stick rotates 90 degrees, and then hold it vertically just to be easier. Also you'll find here is a text-to-speech screen reader, which will read out text on screen, including, quote, info that assists with operations such as the cursor's position.
Display TV resolution 2160p, 4K.
And if you want to use game chat with accessibility options, that exists too, considering there's a feature for it to have voice speech to text, so that other people's voices will be transcribed on your screen as text, or text-to-speech audio. So if you just want to type on a keyboard and have it played out as audio to your friends,
Thanks for playing.
that works too. And considering how lacking the Switch 1 was for its accessibility options, I think all of these are great steps forward. And they're definitely still behind industry standard, so if Nintendo's catching up, I just hope they keep catching up faster. And with that, folks, YouTube predicts that you might like this video. So see if they're right, and I'll see you soon.